So it's part of the irony of the evening to be called a sharpshooter on an evening when we are discussing peace and the apostle of peace. But good evening, everybody. And in addition to Payal, of course, there's Neena, Shuli, Anjali, and Ritu who join me in welcoming all of you here today. There are a couple of conversations pre this stage conversation that I want to quickly tell you about. One was that there are new people here, and someone said, please talk about the idea of algebra again. So I will. You know, we set it up really to create a space where you could challenge your perspectives, to meet people who persuade us emotionally and intellectually to change the positions that we hold uncontested. And in many ways, that has been what we have tried to do over the last 8 months, to create spaces for intellectual and emotional transformation. And the high point of my evening, certainly this evening, was that there were friends in the audience who said that, particularly the last session when we had Kanhaiya Kumar and the session on Kashmir, that there were people who came here with assumptions and went away with their minds changed. And so one feels that all of us as a collective are living out the dream with which algebra began. In keeping with that, the speaker that we have today absolutely embodies the spirit of algebra. And the subject that we're here to discuss is not just the embodiment, but the absolute spirit of, emotional and intellectual transformation. In fact, Albert Einstein, on the 70th birthday of the Mahatma, had said that for generations to come, people will find it hard to believe that a man such as this one walked in the flesh and blood on this earth. And it's a measure of the generation we have become, the kind of post-truth world that we live in, that someone like the Mahatma, who universally across the world is called the Mahatma, in recent times has been assailed by many new interpretations of him. Some believe that he's an old idea, he's old hat, he's just a totem. There are others who have accused him of being anti-Hindu, a Hindu baiter, a Hindu hater. There are yet others who've said he was a Muslim hater and a Hindu supremacist. Someone who's accused him of being anti-Dalits and pro-caste Hindus, and yet others who've said that he was very greedy about Kashmir and greedy, in fact, about power. And that's only some of the accusations that have been hurled at Gandhi in recent times. And which is why we thought of calling this session Gandhi in La La Land, because it kind of sums up the world in which we live, where today power expresses itself by dropping the mother of all bombs. And that's what even the liberals and the left, applaud a man like Trump for doing that, and views on him change because of that. So in many ways that sums up why we're here today, to look at whether Gandhi has any relevance in today's world, whether his ideas still persuade, and whether they still exist in with any political significance in the modern world. To do that, to defend the ideas of Gandhi, is someone who is really special, because he is the grandson of Mahatma Gandhi. Rajmohan Gandhi is a professor at Illinois University, but also has been a great political figure himself, not in terms of party politics, but standing up for civil liberties, being part of PUCL, the PUDR. He's led, delegations in the UN, but he's also been a biographer of some of the most significant political figures of our time. Sardar Patel, Ghaffar Khan. He's done, of course, biographies on the Mahatma, and he's done a book on Punjab and Gujarat. So in many ways, he really straddles the political spectrum that was the source code of the country that we live in today and take so much for granted. So to discuss that source code, to understand whether it has any value still, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Rajmohan Gandhi.
Thank you. I believe I also have a lapel mic. I hope it works. Am I being heard?
Yes.
Great. And I'm also able to see all of you with some effort, and that's also great for me. It's wonderful. So.
Rajmohan, I wanted to start, with the personal rather than the political. Being the grandson of the Mahatma is no mean thing. To have lived through, to have been in the penumbra of a man like him, must have left some indelible ink on you. Could you sum up for you what Gandhi meant and how he has lived through your life? What are the ideas that really affected you?
I should start by saying that Gandhi had 4 sons. Sadly, he had no daughters. He and his wife Kasturba had 15 grandchildren, and of whom 8 or 9 are still living. I was born here the broad capital region. I was born in New Delhi in 1935. My father, Devdas Gandhi, was the youngest of Gandhi's 4 sons. He was the editor of the Hindustan Times for a long time. And when I was born, my grandmother, Kasturba, came to assist my mother for the delivery, which she did for as many grandchildren as she could. Fortunately for me, my grandfather was in Delhi a good deal in the final 2 years of his life. Between 1946 and 48, when he was going from 76 to 78, and I was going from 10 to 12, he was often in Delhi. I was going to school in Delhi. So I saw a good deal of him at that time. Of course, there was no question of Gandhi staying in our home. You might say, of course, it's odd that somebody does not stay in his son's home. But it wasn't odd to us because we grew up recognizing and accepting the fact that he belonged to everybody. Family first was not his motto. Whether it should have been is another matter, but factually, family first was not his motto. He was trying to make of all of India a family, and that was full-time work. So he didn't have enough time to... And yet, during that phase of his life when he was frequently in Delhi, I saw a good deal of him. He was very affectionate. We'd never had long one-on-one conversations, although my sister Tara, whom some of you here know quite well, did have some interesting conversations. She was a student of St. Thomas School it used to be called Reading Road in those days, Mandir Marg, and it used to have an English headmistress. And
Rajmohan, if I may just...
Am I going too long? Is it too long?
Well, no, I just wanted to actually ask that, Rajmohan has just written a book called Why Gandhi Matters, and there's a lovely anecdote there where he bumps into his grandfather at a slum, and Gandhiji notices that he's wearing new spectacles and says, "Did you really need that?" And Rajmohan had all the defenses ready about the fact that his power had changed, and this was one extravagance that he was deserving of. And Gandhiji said, "Really? But did you need new frames?" So that kind of the thrift of the man surely impacted you. But the reason I cut in, Rajmohan, was to ask you that...
Please continue to do that.
No, was to ask you that which of all the myriad ideas that he stood for impacted you the most?
And the idea of fearlessness conveyed not through words but through his attitude. Because during the multi-faith prayer meetings that I would often attend along with him, remember I'm talking of 47, 48, when Delhi had lots of refugees, Hindu and Sikh refugees from Punjab, from West Punjab. Delhi also had many Muslims who were being pushed out by quite a few. So in that atmosphere, for Gandhi's multi-faith prayer meeting, to have as the second item the first chapter from the Quran, the Al-Fatiha, the first item on the prayer meeting was the Buddhist chant, Nam Yo Ho Ren En Kyo, which many of you know. But the second was the opening chapter of the Quran. And sometimes during these multi-faith prayer meetings, some unhappy, angry people would come from West Pakistan, would say, "We don't want to hear this. Please, eliminate this." So Gandhi would try and persuade them. Do you know what it means? It has a wonderful meaning. And he would ask everybody else, do you object to this? No, 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 of course we don't object. So he would say, oh, please withdraw your objection. And generally they did. But on occasion they did not. And then Gandhi would say, well, if you don't want to hear this, then I will also not have the Upanishad, the Gita, and whatever else is to follow. And I was often seated fairly close to him. We were on some kind of platform, and there were hundreds and sometimes thousands attending these prayer meetings. And I would ask myself, these angry people, if they come and hit him, he had no shield, he hardly had any chadar, he had no bodyguard, so would I be able to protect him? So the recognition that he was, he was facing hostility, and he was speaking in a civil manner with those who were angry with him, and he did not budge from his conviction. So that is what was passed on to him.
So, as I mentioned, Rajmohan, you've done biographies of many of the greats, our founding fathers of India. So when you look at Ghaffar Khan and you look at Patel and you look at Gandhi, you of course didn't do a biography of Nehru, but you've studied his life as well. Could you, again, it's a big question, but could you in many ways crystallize what each of those figures meant for in the life of India, and what do you see of them now in modern India? What were the different things that they crystallized?
So Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, born in 1890, died in 1988. At the age of 98, I first saw him. Anyway, I know I shouldn't give personal details.
No, please do.
So when I was 10, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, often known as the Frontier Gandhi, and his older brother Dr. Khan Sahib stayed in our home, in the apartment on Connaught Circus. So I knew him when I was 10. I last met him in 87 when he was 97. And his grandson, Asfandiar Khan, asked me, he said, I want a good biography of my grandfather. And so I wrote it. But you know that today, his followers, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan's followers in Pakistan, in the frontier province, now called Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, are being identified and killed by the extremists. Not in ones or twos or dozens, but in the last few years, hundreds have been killed. But we in India have no tears for these people who are killed. These are people who are being killed because they believe in India-Pakistan friendship and in Hindu-Muslim friendship, in tolerance. But because they are Muslims, we don't have tears for them. Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan is an amazing figure for the entire Muslim world, not just for our subcontinent, for the entire world, for the relationship between Muslims and non-Muslims, which is a big issue worldwide, not just in India. Because he believed in complete partnership between Muslims and non-Muslims. He was, of course, totally opposed to the creation of Pakistan. And he also felt that Muslims should be free, should have the courage, should have the freedom to interpret their scripture as he did. He is an amazing figure for today's world. And our subcontinent produced him. He was Gandhi's brother in spirit. He was Gandhi's brother in non-violent arms. He was Gandhi's brother in a fight for freedom, for equality. So I think we all want to love and honor this man. And this little book of mine may tell you a bit more about him. Sardar Patel, I had an encounter with him too. He was Deputy Prime Minister, Home Minister, living on 1 Aurangzeb Road. He didn't say, oh, I can't live here if it's called Aurangzeb Road. He died, not here, he went to Bombay and died there. But he was there for 3 or 4 years. He didn't object to the fact that Aurangzeb did once rule over India. And Vallabhbhai Patel, his role in bringing all the states first into union with one another, the neighboring states, then joining the provinces, becoming part of it. After partition and the tremendous upheaval that caused, if more states had become rebellious, can you imagine what would have happened to India? So Vallabhbhai Patel played a phenomenal role there. And I had the privilege of writing his biography. By the way, yes, there is going to be a 600-foot, I don't know what statue for him, Unity of India statue. I myself I'm not a great believer in statues of any kind. But to suggest that Vallabhbhai Patel, some people are doing that Vallabhbhai Patel was somehow against Jawaharlal Nehru, that he was secretly for some kind of domination of India by Hindus is so totally and completely false. Yes, he and Nehru had many differences, and he always spoke very frankly. I must tell you this, my mother's father, Rajgopalachari, on whom also I've written a biography, he was Governor General of India. And once Vallabhbhai Patel came to see him in what was then called Government House, now called Rashtrapati Bhavan. And Vallabhbhai Patel and my mother's brother, Narsim Mama as we call him, were in the lift together. So Vallabhbhai Patel said to Narsim Mama while they were on the lift together, going up to meet Rajaji, "Tera baap आधा मुसलमान है." तो नरसिम्हा मामा ने अच्छा जवाब दिया, आधा हिंदू तो है ना, आधा हिंदू तो है. So Vallabhbhai would make jokes like that, but he's the man who said Hindu Raj would be a disaster in India. And many people don't know that there was a conspiracy even to kill him by the extremists before Gandhi was killed. And there's documentary evidence of that. So Vallabhbhai Patel is another fabulous person. Who else would you like me to speak about?
Well, many. But Raja Gopalachari, like you said, that to have both bloodstreams running through you is a great privilege. So if you could sum up again, what about Raja Gopalachari was so special? And I'm asking you to really pick. Of course, their public positions are known, but because you've pursued them as a biographer, that what was really outstanding or angular about?
Yes. So this was a political weakness, but a literary and human strength. He didn't care for popularity, and he didn't care for correctness. He spoke his mind on economic issues, political issues. He criticized Patel when needed, Gandhi when needed, according to him, Nehru when needed, Indira Gandhi when needed. And when he wrote something about Kashmir, which some people didn't like, I think this was in 1965, there were attempts to arrest him. This man who had been 10 years in prison, freedom fighter, because he made a statement that some people didn't like. There was a call to have him arrested. Of course, he didn't care. The government didn't have the guts to arrest him. But he was, yes, utter and complete independence of thought.
So, Rajmohan, I'm going to come back to, how much of their ideas and their values are still alive in our contemporary, not just the country, but the world. But before that, just a few more personal insights into Mahatma Gandhi. There's a fascinating anecdote in your book, if you would share that with our audience, when he was leaving South Africa, and the weight, the burden of being a great man on the family was that many people gave him gold and ornaments and gifts of appreciation. And would you share with the audience how he responded to that and the big fight that he and Kasturba had over it?
I should really have the text with me because the actual dialogue is so interesting, but I don't have it and I haven't memorized it. This was at a fairly early stage. He was just about 30 years old, but he'd already made a mark in South Africa. By the way, many people imagine having seen Gandhi's pictures, old bald man with glasses, sometimes carrying a stick, not wearing many clothes. Some people imagine he was born old. But Gandhi was very young. He was 30. He was 30. when this incident took place. And he was planning then to go back to India. He thought he would go back to India for good. In the end, he had to return to South Africa because Indian South Africa demanded that he come back. But he was going. And already in a few short years, he'd done so much for the community. And this community, Gandhi was very fortunate because in South Africa, he met people speaking many languages, Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Tamil speakers, Telugu speakers, Hindi speakers, Gujarati speakers, Sikhs, Urdu speakers, Christians, So he was able to make a laboratory experiment of how to unite Indians in South Africa. So when he was leaving, they decided to give him gifts. And so he was troubled by this. He was given gifts. Kasturba was given all kinds of jewelry, gold necklaces and stuff. He walked up and down, thinking about it, and decided he could not accept the gifts. And he then confronted Kasturba with this decision that we're not accepting these gifts because our life is different. Our life is for the community. And then Kasturba says to him, so have I not had a part in your service? You bring all and sundry to the home anytime. I slave for them. I cook for them. I serve them. You say you've done all this. Have I made no contribution? Some of you are familiar with Draupadi's questions in that assembly, the famous assembly. She asks terrific questions, which are legal questions. Kasturba's questions to Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, barrister, are also legal questions. I wish I had them too, but of course Gandhi remained firm. He also persuaded the sons, who were very young, barely entered their teens, to support him. And so, yes, it was decided not to accept the gifts and to put all the gifts into a trust for the community in South Africa.
In fact, you write of it wonderfully in the book because Gandhi was quite rough with Kasturba and said, this is all arisen out of my work. And that's when she challenged him with that. And later, again, it's a measure of him that it's he who admitted that he coerced her into that decision rather than it being a free decision on her part. And that's the kind of openness that one takes for granted about Gandhi.
And Kasturba being Kasturba, we would never have heard of the incident had Gandhi not recorded it. So it showed him in a bad light, but at least he had the honesty to tell the story.
So in fact, Rajmohan, that's a perfect entry into what I was describing, that we live in such a contested world now that Gandhi himself and all the core values or the source code, as I said, for this country is itself contested now. And we take it so much for granted, the non-violence, the ahimsa, that we forget how complicated his fight and his journey was. So, Arundhati Roy, Perry Anderson, Swami Sachidanandan, who you've written of in your book, they're the ones who've most volubly accused Gandhi of all these things that I mentioned. So if we could go through some of them, some of the bigger accusations. For instance, about Gandhi's approach to violence, we take it so much for granted that he was constantly non-violent. He was born non-violent. But back in South Africa, he actually supported the empire against the blacks and the Zulu rebellion. He took an ambulance corps into the battlefield. Could you talk about that incident and how his ideas about non-violence evolved from that?
I'll do that, but if you'll allow me, Shoma, I also want to mention the fact that yes, there are all these accusations. But please, the vast majority of humankind thinks that Gandhi had presented some terrific ideas to us. Yes. So we should not forget that. Sometimes we are concerned with these allegations. We should be, and if need be, we should answer them. But I think it's very important to note this. Allow me to say this, Shoma. Gandhi he died in 48. Who were his great contemporaries worldwide? Yes, there was Churchill, there was Roosevelt, there was de Gaulle. We may think of some others. But which of his political contemporaries are remembered today in any part of the world as often as Gandhi is? Which of his contemporaries are quoted, cited, referred to, described, taught in schools? I get messages all the time from young students doing school projects on Gandhi. Please, we want to interview you. Gandhi's impact today on the world is really wider, deeper than many of us realize. So I want that to be understood before I answer your question about these great accusations against Gandhi. But these are important ones. So this Swami Sachidanand, who is actually a Gujarati Swami, and he has done some interesting things and he's held in good regard by several people. So one of his admirers took me to see him in Ahmedabad and he said to me, yeah, your grandfather was an amazing man, but he had two great weaknesses. He did not understand the power of the sword. He did not understand how good the sword was, and he did not understand how bad Islam was. Then Perry Anderson, who is also quite well known in some parts of the world, his brother is better known, Benedict Anderson, the great political scientist, who has written these theories of nationalism. Very remarkable man, whose books I have studied. But Perry Anderson writes that Gandhi was actually a believer in the Hindu right. He wanted to suppress the Muslims. He wanted to establish Hindu domination. He wanted to establish Ram Rajya. And this temple movement is absolutely connected with Gandhi. So these are two opposite criticisms. Of course, one way of answering these is to say, well, let Swami Sachidanand answer Perry Anderson. Perry Anderson answers Sachidanand. But then for more serious scholars, of course, one has to present an irrefutable case. And there is, here again is extraordinary. Of all the modern people, famous people, recent 2 or 3 generations, no one has been recorded as comprehensively as Gandhi. Gandhi is offering his own words to all his critics. Please, find some inconsistencies, find how horrible I was. Anderson has not been able to find one phrase, let alone one sentence or one paragraph to substantiate the allegation that Gandhi wanted this kind of Hindu Ram Raj. His Rama was his name for the Almighty. And he used Rama's name to win Hindus to his concept of complete equality for Muslims, Hindus, Christians, atheists in India. He built a fantastic link with the Hindus in order to create equality between Hindus and Muslims and everybody else. So all that is I've tried to establish in one of my books. So which other criticism would you like me to take?
Well, the one that, because Arundhati has a massive following,
sure.
And which was, I found it interesting in your book. Why I asked was, I said, for many of us, Gandhiji seems as though he came a finished man.
Yeah.
And we forget that people evolved their political ideas. And so it's fascinating if you would help us understand why he was perhaps not as much pro-Dalit or not as radical on caste issues as people would have wanted him to be. Okay. And you admit that maybe he wasn't, and maybe some of her criticisms was right. And that is it helps us understand a complicated man and a complicated circumstance. So if you would help.
Complex man, perhaps not a complicated man. Yes. I think he was a complex man. Yes, he did evolve. As all human beings can and should, and he did. But more than that, Shoma, he had a strategy. Sometimes he spoke in radical terms, sometimes he spoke in less radical terms. Why? Because his goal was huge. His goal was complex. He wanted India liberated. He wanted Hindus and Muslims to work together. He wanted caste Hindus and Dalits to work together. His beliefs were very radical from the start. He may not have known all the complexities of all the hundreds and thousands of jatis in all parts of India. But on the question of equality between all the castes and subcastes, he was a radical from the start. And so when he said, and this is where he was also astute, and I think he was successful, but yes, you can accuse him of inconsistency. And his positions changed. So I would say his positions, his stands changed, not so much his thinking changed. So for a long time, because he needed to win the high caste Hindus, who were the most influential people of India. He himself was one of them. He liked them. Yes, they had their prejudices, they had their weaknesses, but he liked them and he needed them. And so he said, yes, we must reform this caste question, we must have equality, but we must respect also the caste Hindus. And for some time, he tried to say that the Varnashram system was wonderful. But every time he said it, that the Varnashram system was wonderful, he also added the line saying, but it is impossible in practice. It is impossible to create it in practice. The ideal Varnashram system of division of labor with complete equality, with no friction, is a beautiful concept, but it can never work. But the Hindu caste, the caste Hindu said, well, this man is not against us. So much of his inconsistency, not all of it, but much of it, is completely understandable in terms of the strategy he adopted. Remember that Gandhi was not just a saintly man, he was an astute political leader. He had to carry Hindus and Muslims together, high caste and low caste together, capitalists and workers together in order to unite India, to liberate India. You know, by the way, these days some people have forgotten there was something called the freedom struggle. Yeah. They think that the British in their great act of kindness, first in the act of kindness they ruled India, then in the act of kindness they left India. Gandhi and people like that created unnecessary problems for everybody, including for all of us. And many people genuinely recall those days of impartiality, justice, good administration, good civil servants. But what was so bad about him? But my goodness, it was tough to unite India against that. Gandhi did that. And so some of his inconsistent attitudes can be understood as part of his strategy. And he radicalized himself with time as and when he was more confident, he was sure of his support, then he moved forward. Radical proposal. And remember, and Arundhati Roy does acknowledge that the Congress asked Ambedkar to draft the Constitution or to be the chairman of the drafting committee. But who asked Nehru and Patel to invite Ambedkar? Gandhi did. And there's documentary proof of that. Ambedkar's biographers have acknowledged it. And Gandhi knew Ambedkar's amazing qualities. And it was an incredible thing. Just as the absorption of princely states into India compensated to a large extent the terrible tragedy of partition, in the same way, the fact that Ambedkar, Dalit, brilliant lawyer, plays the leading part in creating a constitution that abolishes untouchability, that establishes equality, and gets that constitution passed by a constituent assembly, the overwhelming majority of whom are caste Hindus, was a tremendous achievement. So we can be proud of that, and proud of Gandhi's role also in that.
That's an understatement. Well, the reason I was posing those was really to draw attention again to the point that because we've inherited this country, which is free, which is robust, it's a robust democracy, and we complain about a lot of aspects of it, but at other times we forget just how wondrous this entire experiment is. But because today the idea is to really interrogate whether those core ideas are still alive, Rajmohan. Of course, we are a liberal democracy, we are open, we have free elections, The values that are enshrined in our constitution are wonderful. But do you think that Gandhi's ideas are still living amongst us? Or do you think it's really just enshrined in the, in the kind of statues and garlands and anniversaries that we observe?
So that's a great question, and I would preface my answer to that by saying that what we should ask ourselves, what is fundamentally Gandhi's idea? In my humble assessment, yes, there is satyagraha, there is non-violence, there is truth. But the fundamental idea that each of us can consider, which I think is the message of Gandhi's life. Remember Gandhi's important statement, my life is my message. My life is my message. What do we take from his life? We take from his life the fact this man, whatever he really felt he should do, he did. Whatever he felt he should say, he said. No matter what. So the central message of Gandhi's life is, do what your conscience tells you to do. Yes, use your mind also along with your conscience. If your mind and your conscience tell you to do something, have the courage to do it. I suggest to you that this idea is very badly needed in India today. Of course, the other things that follow from Gandhi obeying his conscience, that we should be friendly with people we don't understand. We should understand other linguistic groups, other religious groups. We should examine our prejudices. In Hinswar, and this is in this latest book also, this quotation. In 1909, this 108 years ago, Gandhi writes about relationship between a nation and a religion. Can a religion and a nationality be kind of synonymous or be identical or be conflated? And he comes to the conclusion it cannot be. In no nation, he says, can religion and nation be one and the same. 1909. And then he continues to say, here I'm not quoting exactly, or maybe if I have the book, I'll even read the exact words. It's a very important, yes, I think, just give me a minute or two and my wonderful wife will give me the book. She may not open it on the page I want. But here I hope I will find it. Oh yes, I think I know where it is. Terrible. See how horribly unprepared I am. But anyway, no, I can't find it. But anyway, he says that something like this. If there are passages in the Quran that I do not understand or I do not like, does that mean that I should dislike a Muslim friend? Similarly, if a Muslim is not able to understand something from the Gita, should he then dislike a Hindu? And he says that the justification for coexistence, to belong to the same nation, partnership, is not that we agree with everybody else or we like everybody's ideas, but we need each other, we have to live with each other. We are living in the same place. We are in the same boat. So that is Gandhi's common sense explanation of nationality, coexistence, partnership, equal rights. Yes, he has his multi-faith prayers. He's a religious man. But his justification, his explanation for civil society, for human rights, is very down to earth and pragmatic.
Rajmohan, if you could again just remind us about the idea of ahimsa and non-violence.
Yes.
Again, it's become, almost equal to a kind of passivity rather than a kind of active resistance that he meant it to be. And again, it's reading your book that one recalls that partly why he was talking about that non-violence was because if you won victory through force, that you would perpetuate the same structures of power. So could you again just speak of that and whether that holds good now? Is it that because we are all mostly democracies, that that idea of non-violence no longer has the same power that it once did when you had to overthrow empires?
So, Gandhi's non-violence, of course, it meant that you don't pick up a gun. Key doctrine, be ready to be killed, but never be ready to kill. First part is also important. Be ready to be killed, but never be ready to kill. But in addition to no use of lethal arms, there was another very important component. If possible, have goodwill towards your enemy. Reconciliation, friendship, the rejection of enmity was as important to Gandhi as the unwillingness to use arms to kill people. That's something important. And so today, yes, India and Pakistan, as well as Syria, so many factions in Syria, many other parts of the world have these very sharp, very understandable reactions. How horrible their treatment. We must hit back. 50 heads for one, says the mother of one. It's understandable. But if 50 heads are obtained, somebody will want 50 times 50 heads. So we have to see, yeah?
Sorry, Rajan, I'm just cutting in because, I'm really trying to understand the efficacy of those ideas now because, for instance, would you equate, would it be possible in your understanding to, say, fight the ISIS with the kind of non-violent thinking that Gandhi had?
No.
Why was the violence of the empire different from some of the violence that we see now?
Because ISIS is different from the British Empire. Let's face it.
So that's the point. That would those ideas of non-violence, have they lost their edge somewhat in this modern world?
Sorry, wait a second. Hitler was around. Hitler was around. But in 46, 47, 48, did people say non-violence was not relevant? Hitler was around, Stalin was around. But non-violence was also around. Today, yes, ISIS is terrible, and of course ISIS can't be defeated with prayer and non-violence. But those who are opposed to the ISIS, the Shias and the Sunnis of the Middle East, the Turks and the Arabs and the Iranians, can't they come together and fight ISIS? That's non-violence today. Nobody says, oh, don't use violence against ISIS. But everybody says, all of you are against ISIS, but you are fighting with each other. That's the madness. That's the irrelevance. Non-violence is not irrelevant. That is the irrelevant. One other point. Take the Palestinians in Palestine and the Kashmiris in Kashmir. They want free will to prevail. They want self-determination. It's a very noble objective. And Gandhi did say again and again with Hyderabad, with Junagadh and with Kashmir, that it's not the Raja's will that should prevail, but the people's will that should prevail. But it's not just the Indian security forces that are keen to hold on to Kashmir. All of India feels Kashmir is Hamara Atut Ang, or 99%, or we don't know. Nobody has done proper polling, but many people feel. So if the people of Kashmir have to win sympathy of Indians for what they want, they have to adopt methods that would work. Supposing in one city or one tehsil or one gaon in Kashmir, men and women said, we don't like India. We want to be Azad. We will keep Azad on our t-shirts, but we will be absolutely non-violent and do this day after day after day after day. And if the news of this goes to different parts of India, won't some Indians be influenced? I believe many will be, and the same is true of the Palestinians. The number of Israeli Jews who are courageously fighting for Palestinian rights, you know this very well. It's extraordinary what they're doing. But if there are Palestinians willing to have non-violent strategies, if Kashmiris are willing to have non-violent strategies, then public opinion will change. And I'll make one other important point here. 1857, you know all about that. But some of you don't know what Charles Dickens said. Many of you love Charles Dickens and his books. When he heard of the killings of British women and children in India in 1857, Charles Dickens wrote in a letter, which afterwards became public, that I would like the Indian race to be extirpated. But when Gandhi did this non-violent movement against the British, Salt March took place in 1930. Nobody in India even remembers that was the time of the Great Depression. Among other things, the boycotts, it added to unemployment in Britain. But when Gandhi goes to England in 1931, the families of the unemployed workers embrace Gandhi. Because there is non-violence and there is goodwill. He says, I want India to be liberated because it's good for you guys in the long run. The violence of 1857 was injurious to the national cause. The non-violence of Gandhi did something fantastic for the national cause. And this is something that the realists of the world should also understand.
Rajmohan, when you say that, I think it's important to recall that Gandhiji, of course, has written extensively about how it strengthened empire, the 1857 rebellion, that they consolidated power, whereas his approach didn't. I'm going to very quickly open this up because there are going to be many questions from the audience. But before that, just two questions. One is that where do you think that, Nehru, who was pretty much mentored by Gandhi and whose political understanding grew with Gandhi, where did those ideas peter out that, the absolute custodian of democracy has ended up being equated with dynastic rule? Where do you think that went wrong? And the second question is that we spoke earlier about Gandhi conflating religion with nationalism or with the freedom movement. And perhaps he was wise to do so because, as you said, he had to mobilize the masses. Do you think that Nehru and the left and the liberals and everyone who came after made a mistake in divorcing India and Hindus from some of the kind of religious and cultural symbolism that actually runs in the blood? Is that why the left of center, and when I say left, I don't mean just the left parties, but the political left, is so discredited today? It seems to have no connection with the masses anymore.
I think we should not make these very broad generalizations about what people feel and what they don't feel. We don't really know. We haven't done enough surveys, but it is true. The left has suffered many setbacks. It is also true that by not recognizing and accepting the great hold that religion has in India, the left made very serious mistakes. The left also failed to recognize the great hold caste has in it. They spoke of class. They thought class was the most dominant thing. Religion was not important, caste was not important. But in reality, caste, religion are extremely important. Gandhi was aware of that reality, absolutely aware of that reality. But Gandhi was also respectful of the agnostics and the atheists. So he recognized the diversity. So yes, it is, I think, fair to say that many of the liberal left intellectuals, and Jawaharlal Nehru might be included in that category, amazing man, also did not, he was so full of his rationalism and his passion against hypocrisy and his passion against the misuse of religion, that he felt that somehow there could be a transformation by totally ignoring or even rejecting the religious side. So that perhaps perhaps was a mistake. But, we must never make the mistake of projecting into the past the feelings of today. In the 40s, Jawaharlal Nehru was a darling of everybody in India, including the religious people. And people absolutely loved him. Continued in the 50s, 60s, of course, afterwards it declined. So it isn't as if Jawaharlal became unpopular. No, he was hugely popular. And yes, Gandhi had a role in helping to elevate Jawaharlal Nehru to leading role. But Gandhi didn't do it against public opinion. Gandhi did it recognizing public opinion and recognizing Jawaharlal Nehru's abilities and qualities. And by the way, many of you are well aware, in the last 20, 30 years, the systematic propaganda in using social media, whispering campaigns, pamphlets. फिरोज गांधी का नाम तो फिरोज खान था, मोतीलाल नेहरू के दादा तो मुसलमान थे. You may laugh कि 1857 में बचने के लिए उन्होंने नाम बदल दिया. कोतवाल थे दिल्ली में उनके. And so many millions have swallowed this. I've traveled to different parts of India and I've come across these stories about Jawaharlal, Motilal, Indira, Firoz. In America, also many Americans believe that Barack Obama is not an American national and is a Muslim. But the number of Indians who believe falsehoods about Jawaharlal, the proportion is even greater, sadly. But this is also something that has happened. But I believe that ultimately, Satya Mev Jayate, truth. And you're right. I've not written Jawaharlal Nehru's biography. And I've criticized him. I criticized him when he was living. I criticized him afterwards on many issues. But he was a fabulous Indian. He was a remarkable Indian. And if we don't recognize that, we're making a mistake. Now, on the specific question about the dynasty, yes, I think it is fair to say. It is fair to say. I'll come back to another way. About Gandhi, by the way. Everybody used to say in India at the time, what an amazing man. He's putting the country first, doesn't worry about the family. What a fabulous man. Today, what a terrible man, he didn't look after his family. So, yes, maybe Gandhi went too far in distancing himself from his biological family. And maybe Jawaharlal Nehru didn't go far enough in that direction.
Well, I'm going to open this up. There are a couple of questions on his views on ecology and environment, which I'll come back to because we forget so much of all the prophetic vision almost that he had about the world. But let me open this up, and if we have time, I'll ask you about that.
Thank you ever so much for bringing Gandhiji alive in such a beautiful way. I have a provocative question to ask. If Gandhiji was alive today, you would have heard a plaintive cry of Hey Ram. What do you think? How do you think he would have dealt with our society as we see it today? With all this information.
I have an answer to this. I think this question should never be asked. I mean, do people say in America, "Arey, agar Lincoln hota to hame kya batata?" Do the British say, "Agar Churchill hota to hum kya karte?" My goodness, Was it not enough for Gandhi to do what he did in his lifetime? Sorry if I'm, without wanting to be, without knowing that I would be, I get emotional. But I'm making a very serious point. It is not reasonable to expect our great Gandhi died 70 years ago. Why should we want him to be around and tell us what to do? It's this disservice to our present generation and future generation. We have to figure out our own solutions. Yes.
Yes. Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you very much. Wonderful discussion, tremendous quote. My question is in two parts. What did Jinnah have against Gandhi? Why was he so, shall I use the word, poisonous against Gandhi? कि Gandhi drama करता है, Gandhi this thing. Second thing, is it correct that in one of the Congress party elections, Patel was voted probably 18 out of 21, and Gandhi persuaded the party to make Nehru the president of the party, and no, that's it.
So, Jinnah question. First of all, I think great historical events like partition or other great changes can't be reduced to one or two or three events, although we may like to. Although some of these events perhaps are very important, very crucial, but if only sort of question, we should be a little careful of, because history is dependent on so many millions of people, millions of people interacting with millions of other people. So great individuals also play a role, but how crucial, decisive, salient those roles are, we should be a little cautious about imagining that everything hangs on all of you. Okay, that having said, Jinnah was for a long time a believer in Hindu-Muslim unity. Jinnah and Gandhi both were great followers of Gopal Krishna Gokhale. Gokhale called Jinnah ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity for some time. Jinnah was a very able man. But I have also done a sort of mini biography of Jinnah. A very remarkable man in many ways. But I think that when the great Hindu-Muslim partnership took place in the 1919, 1920, 1921, 1922, Jinnah got silent. But in 1917, when Montagu came to India, a British reporter in India told Montagu, Secretary of State for India, about this man Jinnah, who he said that Jinnah expects to lead all of India before long. So Jinnah was very close to being the number one figure. So when Gandhi comes and displaces him, that is a factor. I'm not saying it is a terribly important factor or the factor, but it is a factor in the story. So putting it very, very over in a simplistic, not an oversimplified manner, but in a simplified manner, simplistic manner, Jinnah would rather be number one in a small area than number two or number three in all of it. In addition to that, he was very hardworking, he was very single-minded, he had a great strategy, he was a superb lawyer, constitutional lawyer. And he could not be bought, could not be threatened, so the Muslims always wanted him to be their permanent president, because they felt that nobody could push him around, nobody could buy him. So he became very powerful, and ultimately he felt that he could get what he wanted by espousing a Muslim nation, Muslim majority nation. So that was a factor. But we must also recognize that there was Hindu-Muslim tension anyway. Let us not imagine that India was always wonderfully harmonious, or that Hindu and Muslim people in India fused into becoming one people. They did not. As I've often said, the Muslim elite had the notion that our belief is pure. We believe in the one God and you believe in metal, wood, lakdi, पेड़ आपके तो किस्म किस्म के लेकिन हम इतना pure, we have a pure belief in one God. And the Hindu elite said, we are pure by birth. You foreigners, you Dalits, you are impure by birth. So the purity of belief and the purity of birth clashed. Somehow, the vast majority of Indian people learned to coexist, to ignore these ideological differences. But there was a basis of mistrust, of ill will, which was successfully used by polarizers on both sides. By Jinnah, by Savarkar, who also said Hindus and Muslims are two nations. And Jinnah said Hindus and Muslims are two. Gandhi said, no, all of India is one nation. So there was this. So on the Patel and Nehru business, yes, it is a fact that in the summer of 1946, when the time came for finding a new Congress president, Maulana Azad had been president for 6 years, but during this time everybody was in prison, there was no new election. 46, there was a chance to elect a new president. And by this time, Patel was quite old also. He had played a very great part in the Quit India movement. Very great part. He had been president only once before in 1931. Jawaharlal had been president in 29, 36, and 37. So the way the Congress president was chosen in those days, I'm not saying it was a good way, I'm just telling you how it was done. The provincial Congress committees were all asked to nominate somebody. And then they would say, Gandhiji, these are all the names. And Gandhi would say, I think X, Y, or Z should. And it was endorsed in an election. This was more or less how it happened. In 1946, some people proposed Vallabhbhai Patel's name to be the president of the Indian National Congress. Various provincial committees. 2 or 3 committees, or I think maybe one, proposed Acharya Kripalani's name. He had been General Secretary of the Congress for a long time. Nobody proposed Nehru's name. Patel's name was supposed to be Congress president not because they wanted Patel to be the first Prime Minister of India. They wanted to honor this great leader by giving him the presidency of the Indian National Congress. Gandhi felt at that time, rightly or wrongly, he may have been wrong, that the president of Congress now will hold negotiations with the British. And this is at a time when partition demand is very strong. 46, the partition demand is very, very strong. And Gandhi wants to avert partition. Maulana Azad says, I am ready to be president again. But Gandhi feels, no, that is not. Gandhi feels Jawaharlal Nehru would be the best in all circumstances. And he persuaded first Kripalani to withdraw his name, and then Vallabhbhai. And in 1 second, Vallabhbhai withdraws his name. What a great man! What a great man! He withdraws his name. And Jawaharlal Nehru is elected president of the Indian National Congress. This is how it happened. Whether Gandhi was right is for others to judge, but this is what happened.
Okay. I was just going to open up a whole new chapter.
I have a few more questions.
Yeah, any other questions? Sure.
So
one aspect of the narrative of Gandhi is about celebrating him, and we said that he permeates our entire culture, and I mean it's a reality that he's respected and celebrated even today and remains unrivaled as compared to any other world leader of that time. And the other narrative about him is about, I mean, when they are faced with some inconsistencies, which are many about his approach, and then the answer to that is that it was maybe because he was an astute leader and he recognized the diversity in India and struck the right balance. And if that be the case, and relying on that aspect of the narrative, then doesn't it axiomatically flows that then today, because of this vast change in circumstances, Gandhi, whether we like it or not, is reduced to irrelevance.
Reduced to?
Irrelevance. Based on the approach that at that time he recognized the situation at that time, recognized the diversity at that time, and he was at best an astute leader. And we then don't answer the questions in an ideological frame or at a principled level, but answer them in the context of the prevailing circumstances at that time. So by that logic, my question to you is whether we like it or not. I mean, with deep respect to Gandhiji, but with that logical approach, doesn't he then get reduced to irrelevance?
No, wait, I don't know what one means here by relevance. Please, I want everyone to examine, ask, what do we mean by relevance? If by relevance we mean that some Gandhi sentence or some Gandhi formula or some Gandhi picture or some Gandhi image will solve our problems, then of course Gandhi is irrelevant. Totally irrelevant. But everybody in the past is irrelevant there. But if we learn from Gandhi that certain things are of supreme importance, that Hindus and Muslims must live together, that there must not only be equal rights, but there must be fraternity, that high caste and low caste and untouchables must live together and have fraternity, that idea is not irrelevant. Yes, if there is no Gandhian formula that will solve our problems, yes, I agree with that, totally. There is no Gandhian that if we start spinning, our problems will be solved. Of course not. But that's not what we mean by relevance. By relevance, we mean that we are inspired by their example and we will tackle today's problems. Then I would say Gandhi is very
Yes, Shoma, you mentioned something about Gandhi's ideas about ecology, and that's what I would like to question. So it's been great listening to you. Gandhiji made one of his quotes is that the earth provides for everyone's need, but not everyone's greed. But India is now in a path of major consumerism. Not just India, of course, the entire, it's a global thing. What would you say? What do you think? Your Gandhi's ideas related to the environment, related to ecology, in context of this path that we are on, how relevant or what do you think?
No, I thank you thank you for proving Gandhi's relevance, by the way.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
In fact, it links for us. When I read the book, one of the most exciting things I found was that in 1909, traveling on a ship, addressing the great questions of civilization, nationhood, nationalism, he actually spends a fair amount of time trying to understand the sustainability model. In 1909, when he was beginning to manufacture motor cars, he's already wondering about sustainability, and he's already telling us that the planet cannot sustain what we're embarking on.
Yeah, so absolutely right. Absolutely right. And there's also this amazing quote from Gandhi, I think 1926 or 27, I don't have the exact words here, where he talks about England, which was then the richest country in the world, already has committed so much exploitation. He says, if India becomes greedy like England, then the world will be stripped bare. He uses the word locusts. So, yes, Gandhi was amazingly relevant. So So that formula of need and greed is, I think, a relevant formula even today, if we want a formula.
So you really need that frame which you're wearing now.
Look, many of you here are truer Gandhians than I am. In terms of your discipline, your dedication, your respect for one another. I wish I could live up to what I know to be right. So I thank you. My specs are the least bad part of me. Thank you.
Can I ask you to comment on two things about Gandhi? Because he's so complex and he's been so oversimplified as a cardboard cutout in India, two things that are relevant to me. One, I think he's arguably one of the greatest journalist reporters India has ever seen. His writings are incredible. I mean, they answer to all the qualities of good writing and journalism, and there's 100 volumes of them. Second is he has this incredible sense of humor that nobody ever talks about. So is there something you can tell us about those two things?
You see, I'm very bad at remembering things, and but yes, we do. Yes, Gandhi was a damn good journalist, and he had a fantastic sense of humor. This man who wrote The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich was William Shirer. William Shirer met Gandhi in the final phase of Gandhi's life. He met Gandhi in the 30s again. He wrote this amazing book also on Gandhi, by the way, a memoir. He says, William Shirer, this great American journalist who wrote The Fall of the Third Reich, that if ever there is in the world a man half as charming as Gandhi, I would be surprised. So in the midst of 46, the tragedy, he meets Gandhi and finds Gandhi charming. And of course, humor was a very crucial part of that charm.
Are there any more questions? Thank you very, very much, Rajmohan. I first really want to thank you for your moments of vulnerability and emotion, because I don't know about the rest of you, to me it just reminded, it brought home to me the precociousness of all of us to sit here and to even question Gandhi and Nehru and Patel and all of these greats that walked the earth. And I call it precociousness because we are not even living a quarter fraction of what these men and women lived through. But we are full of cocky questions about them. And I think that, sorry to kind of, intervene in this conversation with my personal sense, but so much of what we take for granted in our national life today is really, it's running in our blood because of what these men and women spoke of. And just preparing for this conversation with Rajmohan, reading of that, it still makes your hair stand, it still makes your blood flow faster. And I think we forget that, and we are apathetic about what the DNA code, the source code that was laid for our country and made us safe. And I just wanted to end with one little anecdote, again from Rajmohan's book, which was a shock to me because I didn't realize that precise moment when independence was declared, that Mahatma Gandhi was sitting in the poorest area of Calcutta, in Beliaghat, trying to stop the Hindu-Muslim riots. And so the greatest soul that walks the earth in contemporary time, at that moment of victory, he was in a slum in Beliaghat, in Kolkata, speaking both for Hindus and Muslims. And I think that sums up in the fact that Rajmohan was brought to tears almost by the precociousness of our questions is my greatest takeaway from this evening. And thank you for sharing that, Rajmohan. Thank you very, very much for reminding us of the great ideas that birthed this nation. There were more questions I wanted to pose to you about Mr. Modi and Mr. Rahul Gandhi and all the leaders that make up our time. And maybe that is why.
Please, why don't you?
Okay.
If you're open for that, yes.
Why? There's no comparison. How can you?
No, I'm not comparing them.
But I will just, before we proceed or stop, it's up to you. I'm willing for either. Yes, Gandhi, Nehru, Patel and others, Ambedkar, many others, amazing, amazing people, but they would not have achieved what they did if your parents, grandparents also had not stood at their side. Really, really. This is so many families in India have memories of uncles, aunts, grandparents who played a part, large or small. Those were very, very important parts.
So, I'm not speaking of these current leaders in comparison with the founding leaders of this country, but there are two questions I wanted to understand your perspective on, Rajmohan. One is that Ramchandra Guha, who's been a historian of the nationalist movement, recently wrote a piece where he said Mr. Modi is perhaps one of the most significant political leaders and most strong political leaders, I forget the exact adjective he used, to have come out in India in recent time, and perhaps after Indira Gandhi, the most significant one. So I wanted to understand your reading of Mr. Modi.
Yes.
Also this answering to conscience. He seems to be somebody who is living by whatever tenets that he believes in. So how do you read him as a leader? And secondly, this business about renunciating power. Rahul Gandhi, in many ways, says that he's not interested in the positions of power. Yet he continues to occupy that position. Do you think that this is problematic and a mutilation of the idea of renouncing power?
Okay, so let's take Mr. Modi first. I absolutely agree that Mr. Modi is a remarkably effective.
Excuse me, would you like to write his biography, Mr. Modi's biography?
No. I think I already have a next project, and I'm only 82, but still.
That would be incomplete.
Okay, what is your perspective?
So, Mr. Modi is a very effective leader, no doubt about it. He's also a bold leader. His demonetization plan, which was, from what little I understand, was more political than economic, was a big gamble, and it seems to have worked. But whether or not everybody agrees that it has worked politically, most people think now that it has worked, it had to be a bold person to take that kind of gamble. He's been there 3 years, and so his authority seems to be intact. He's in command and control of his large, diverse flock. And more can be said. So in many ways, he's certainly a very impressive leader. And also, by using many skills, including marketing skills, I think he's a very, very great marketer. His advertising skills are also impressive. Swachh Bharat is only one such. If you go to, for different reasons, we recently traveled in many parts of India by road, especially in southern India, but also in eastern India as well. Whether it's a bank or a petrol station, every public sector place in the remotest part of India has wonderfully, beautifully designed billboards where there is Mr. Modi. He is a permanent feature with different faces, different clothes all the time. But the other person on the billboard changes from place to place. It's a woman, it's a man, it's a girl, it's a sportsman, it's a soldier, it's an old man, it's a pensioner, it's a sick man. And the impression Mr. Modi is there to take care of you. So those of us who don't like his ideology should recognize the fact, whether we like it or not, he has sold himself to many people as the protector of the Indian people today. Yeah. So this is happening. Now, remember, but this also is a statement should be taken with a pinch of salt. Because he won the elections with 31%. Even the recent Delhi Municipal Corporation election, with so much hype, 37%. 63% opposed him. So it isn't as if all of India has been mesmerized by him, please. So let us recognize his effectiveness as a political leader, which Rajmohan also underlines. But also let's recognize that much of India is still skeptical. It's not all united behind any alternative, but much of India is quite skeptical despite all his abilities and his marketing skills. On Rahul Gandhi, and before I go to him, conscience. I would say Narendra Modi is following his convictions. His conscience, when you say his conscience, I'm reminded of Gujarat 2002. So there I don't know, you know.
That's a good distinction between conviction and conscience are two different things.
So on Rahul Gandhi, certainly the Congress party is not responding today in a competitive, let alone compelling way to Mr. Narendra Modi. But, is there anybody else who can do a better job than him? I don't. Maybe there are. I hope there are. But I would say this much for Rahul, that at the present time, for him to be disinterested in some ways in political power and to be taking in some ways idealistic positions, compassionate positions in some cases, there is something about Rahul Gandhi that I have to say I like. Sorry? Well, I'm being truthful about my feelings. Yes, I'm just giving my personal view. I'm not asking you to accept mine.
It's that old wonderful dialectic where in the past people agreed to disagree. You know, we don't have to have consonance on our views. But Rajmohan, just to come back to that, because he is a very contentious person, and definitely somebody that many people feel let down by, because he may be wonderful in his personal capacity, but as a political leader, he is completely ineffective. So when you say that you like him or that he's taking compassionate positions, what are those?
Look, I'm not here to persuade anyone. Absolutely not. Even the earlier part of what I said was not there to persuade. I was telling you exactly what I think. From what little I know of him, I feel that he genuinely is interested in the poor, vulnerable people of India. Is he an effective political leader? Absolutely not. Is the Congress showing any signs of a good fight? No. From what I know of him and read of him, does he have some good instincts for the common people of India? Yes. But is that enough in a political leader? Of course not. These are my views. Others of you may know him better. I certainly have no wish to persuade you to accept my views.
Thank you very, very much, Rajmohan. It's been a real honor to have you here. Rajmohan's books are outside and you can have them signed. And to continue this conversation, it's impossible to capture the sheer range and scale of Gandhiji's views in a conversation this short, and also to be questioning them, as I said, is precociousness. But thank you very, very much, Rajmohan, for reminding us why he is the celebrated man he is. Thank you.